I have been watching The Bear. Great show. I even quite liked the third season, though it was a bit of a come down from the first two. And I've also been watching quite a bit of the discourse online. There is, as there always is, discourse about shipping. And specifically the shipping of the two main characters in the show, Sydney and Carmy. I quite like this ship. Should the two of them be together right now in the show? Perhaps not, but I do think it would be beneficial for the both of them to eventually form a romantic connection. And in any case, the connection they do have is very strong and powerful. It is the most dynamic and visceral relationship on the show. I like the two of them as romantically involved. And the amount of pushback I have seen against this pairing is quite remarkable, I think. I didn't expect it while watching the show, since to me there is such a natural, evident chemistry between the two of them that the thought is at least not implausible. The two of them make each other better, and I think that's the sign of any good relationship, romantic or otherwise. They bond over a shared interest. They deeply care about cooking, and not just cooking, but cooking well, doing it properly, doing it in a way that is artful and valuable, and a credit to what they can accomplish with the sense of imagination and curiosity and sheer endurance. They are both rather flawed as people, even in the show that, relative to others, has a more positive view of humanity. But their flaws are flaws that are relatively complementary. Sydney is extremely passionate about doing this right, about making herself and the workplace in which she works a success. She has the deepest respect for Carmy as a chef. The best meal she ever had was one he cooked in the fancy New York restaurant where he used to work before he came to Chicago, where his family is, for the start of the show. And she wants that. She really does. This is not the most Disney-like, lofty, sentimental show, so she's not going to sing about her hopes and dreams, but they're very clear and very passionate and very evident in how she behaves. And Carmy knows this, and he appreciates that. Like, she expresses her admiration for his fancy chef's coat with the initials on it, so he makes sure to get her something like that. That's a sign of their connection. He, conversely, is still struggling with a lot of psychological baggage. He likes Sydney because she is not associated with his past. She's not associated with all his family drama. She's not associated with the abusive environments in which he's worked. And also because she reminds him of the kind of person he wants to be. Not someone who's always distracted, not someone who's dragged into the shadowy recesses of his mind, but someone who's passionate and caring and committed. Of course, on the other end, she can be a bit too one-sided, a bit too monomaniac in her pursuits, and he's there to offer a bit of perspective. The most beautiful scene between these two does not come in any romantic, grandiose setting. There are no falling waterfalls or shooting stars. It's just the two of them under a table, working on that table, and having a normal conversation that somehow becomes so much more than that. They admit that they make each other better at this. He says that he couldn't do this without her, and more importantly, that he wouldn't even want to. The relationship between them is very strong. It is a relationship that is made. It's not the kind of relationship that is simply taken for granted. It's not superficial. It's not pre-assumed. Hannah Arendt talks about how self-identity is not isolated. It's not an atomized, individualistic project. It's innately communal. It is through action, not through thought alone, that we discover ourselves and allow others to discover us as well. It is through action, which is fundamentally a communal process, a process of people who are intelligible to an extent to each other through their actions, in a way that, say, people just thinking constantly and never discussing anything with each other is not. Action reveals what people truly value. It reveals who people are to themselves and to others, and it's a process that is accomplished with others. It's a process that's accomplished communally. And that's what we see here. The obvious comparison to make is Carmy's relationship with Claire, which is kind of terrible. Even if you do not support the Sydney and Carmy romantic pairing, I really do not see how any sensible, reasonable adult can think that this Claire pairing is up to the level with the rest of the show. It's incredibly sentimentalized and incredibly cliche. Now, why is that bad? There's a difference between cliche and archetype. Archetypes are the story patterns that are more or less innate to humans because they align with our experiences in the world throughout time. But cliches are what happens when those patterns are repeated without thinking, and so the specific form, the specific formula ultimately loses any connection with life, with how the world actually is, and it seems rather trite. This is the opposite of what Aaron's talking about. It's something that's simply taken for granted. It's assumed. It is not formed and discovered through action and through behavior, and as a result it seems kind of liquidy and vague and extremely sentimental. The relationship between Carmy and Sydney, conversely, is strong, not simply because the actors really buzz together, though they very much do, but because the characters discover how much they really care about each other through their actions, through their behavior. That's really the essence of any great workplace show. It's a show with a group of people who might not necessarily seem to have a lot in common, but through the situations in which they are thrown together, through which they act in concert, they discover this unapprehended sense of connection that existed between them, and as a result they grow closer. The Sydney-Carmy pairing is the most dynamic example of that in the show. Now, of course, that does not necessarily mean it needs to be romantic, and of course it doesn't need to be romantic, but I think if the show is going to have any romance, it should be these two with each other. They do not need other romantic partners that are kind of adjacent to the show and completely extraneous to what these characters actually care about and value. Claire is the greatest example of that. But there's also this rather antagonistic conception toward romance in the show that is a bit odd to me, but echoes a pattern I've seen pop up a lot of places in the last 10 or so-ish years. I don't know what I would call this except an exhaustion with romance. A desire for characters not to get together, for relationships to be platonic. And to a certain extent, this is an understandable backlash against the long history of film and TV where romance was very overwhelmingly pushed, because people tend to have a liking for it. And to a certain extent, it can get exhausting. Of course, not every guy and girl who click need to be together. I personally have a lot of very close platonic female friends. But at the same time, I think it can go a bit too far, this backlash. Random example that comes to mind is Disney, where people wanted Disney films without romance, which by itself is fine. But now it seems like Disney is kind of afraid to have any conceptions of romance in those films. There really have not been any big Disney movies for the last 10 or so years that have romance in them, at least not centrally. And this is a recurring pattern. Random example that comes to mind that was popular recently is the Barbie movie. Typically, when you have a lot of these guys against girls stories, which are very, very popular going back to antiquity, the reconciliation at the end comes in the form of something like romance and marriage. But that's not what happens there, which is interesting. I think we as a society are just not quite sure exactly what we want from romance, what models of romantic relationships we want to see. We're clear about what we don't want to see, things that are cliche, superficial, hierarchical, but what we do want is a bit less certain. So I think that partly explains this relatively severe backlash I've seen from a lot of corners about shipping these two, or really in regards to shipping in general for the last 5 or so years. But I think that's kind of unfortunate. Romance is good. Romance is a part of life. When it's earnest and when it's between two people who genuinely care about each other and want to make each other better and want to be a part of people's lives, not just now but into the future, can be a very beautiful thing. It doesn't need to happen necessarily for these two, but I think in the long term it would be better for them. They would both be happier because of it, because they are not going to be with anyone they really connect with in the same way they connect with each other. It's not really like the Dawn and Peggy situation in Mad Men, to which I've seen it compared relatively frequently. That relationship is very special in Mad Men because Dawn has all these relatively bad romantic relationships that don't work for him, don't make him happier, and the idea of there being this one platonic relationship that actually does benefit the both of them is interesting. It's a necessary counterbalance. This show, conversely, does not have any baggage like that about romance. It's a show where these two people genuinely seem to want to be in each other's lives. They genuinely seem to benefit from each other's company long term in a way that at least could be healthy and stable. At least if Carmy is able to work out more of his demons in a way that, say, any relationship with Dawn on Mad Men is absolutely not. Not healthy in any reasonable sense of the term. So I think these two could work, certainly, long term. They have some growth to do on both sides before they can get to that point, but I hope they get there. And I think the two of them would benefit from it. I think the two of them really do want that kind of love, that kind of romantic connection in their lives. And I think it would be better for both of them if it's with each other. They really do have that very strong sense of connection, that sense of understanding. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can. If you want to see more videos like this before anyone else. Again, I want to emphasize, these two do not have to be romantic. Their connection is very electric and very visceral either way. But it would be nice. They really do have this extremely close, tender, heartfelt bond that I think would certainly make for a better romantic situation than either of them would have with anyone else. So anyway, tune soon for our next analysis. Will be coming soon. Promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.